There is a sound I still hear in my sleep, the single, wrong vibration of metal on metal, like a giant waking to swallow you whole. It was the train. It was the nearest thing to silence before impact. He pushed me with the casual certainty of someone sweeping trash off his porch. I remember the shoe that caught my heel, the cheap cuff of his jacket against my chest, the way the world tilted down and away like a photograph being turned. When I hit the platform, the crowd's gasps blurred into something far away. People shoved and pointed. Someone shrieked my name. Maybe my daughter, maybe not. For a second, as the train screamed past, I watched his back. Collins, Jonathan Collins, face set like a man who had practiced 1,000 betrayals and never once been stopped by his own conscience. He walked off as if he had gone for a cigarette. I lay on the cold concrete and tasted copper and fear, and then the good ambulance people were on me, voices as if through 2 panes of glass and a flash of light on my eyelids. They patched me up, of course. The hospital was all efficient lights and soft apologies. My arm was broken, 2 ribs bruised, my pride stretched thin as wire. My daughter held my hand and trembled in ways that were not all hers. She kept saying, "Dad, I'm so sorry," like a prayer to a God I did not know would answer. People asked questions as if everything could be wrapped in curiosity and wrapped neatly. What happened? Did he mean to? And the implied question hung. Did he mean to kill me? Intent. It's a small word with thunder in it. The police did their polite interviews. Jonathan said it had been me who stepped too close. My daughter cried and told the officer she had been at her fiancé's side the whole time, that her man would never. But I have watched the way certain men stand when they have done something awful and gotten away with it. Jonathan's jaw had the slack confidence of someone convinced he could buy his way out of consequence. The medical forms, the bruises, the photographs, nothing in the world fit into neat boxes anymore. When the cast came off, I could hobble on the bad days and walk without thinking on the good ones. There were noises, small things, forensic in my mind. The timing of their messages, the way his eyes slid across a room when someone praised him, the way my daughter flinched when Jonathan said something that sounded a lot like control. He was polite to other people. He was lord in his house. I could have left. I could have sold the house, the old car, packed a bag, and moved to a place where his name meant nothing. It would have been clean, a kind of honest cowardice. But something had lodged in me when the subway screamed past. Not outrage, not exactly. It was a ledger opening. All the small devastations that had added up over 20 years. The way money moved from my hands to his comfort. The way my opinion had been dismissed at gatherings when I tried, once, to speak for the grandchildren. The days he treated my offers of help as charity that belittled the giver. That ledger needed balancing. So I learned to become quiet as a ledger sheet. I showed up at family meals in sweaters that covered my hands. I laughed at jokes I did not like. I learned when to look away. No one suspected the careful little calculations simmering beneath my polite smiles. I began to keep lists, not the dramatic kind, mind you, but inventories, favors he owed, lies he told, small things about his routine. I listened to the cadence of his arrogance and mapped the seams of his confidence. Pride does not like inspection. It frays when you measure it against truth. And yet the world was not simple. My daughter loves her husband. That love was not willful blindness entirely. It had grown like mildew, in quiet spaces, slowly, until it had seeped into the grain of her life. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe her marriage was built on better things than standing on a platform and pressing another man's life into the path of a moving train. Each time I tried to tell her what I felt, what I had seen, she folded it into excuses. He wouldn't, she would say, or, "You're being dramatic, Dad." Drama is easier than the truth. There were nights I stared at my hands and wondered how someone can live in a body that has been almost taken from him and still find the strength to plan. It felt covert and ridiculous, like learning to keep a secret diary at 67. The planning was not about revenge in the cinema sense. I refused to become the cartoon of fury. I wanted something that would fracture him slowly and properly. Truth that could not be bought back. I wanted him to lose what mattered without me lifting a finger that would get me arrested for malice. He had tried to erase me. I would return the favor in a legal, relentless way. Exposure. So I started small. A photograph left casually where someone would find it. A note mislaid in the pocket of a jacket he would wear. A favor called in and then not mentioned. Small incisions that would narcotize his control until it reeked of impotence. I reminded myself that the subway had not killed me. It had taught me patience. The first small victory was a lie exposed at breakfast. He had been boasting, as men in his circles often do, about a promotion that would land him in an office downtown and a corner office with a nameplate. The truth, gleaned from a chatty neighbor who worked in HR, was that no such promotion was scheduled. I did nothing dramatic. I simply mentioned, casual as rain, that the new office would be a big adjustment. The conversation that followed around the table that morning was the first time I saw the color drain from his face in public. He sputtered. He tried to laugh. My daughter, looking at him with something like doubt, asked a question he couldn't answer. That tiny crack felt like a bell tolling. It told me two things. 1. That truth is weightier than swagger. 2. That patience was a weapon no one expected an old man to wield. People look at old men and see only their age. They forget the habits of calculation, the library of memory a long life affords. I would use both. So when the subway tracks hummed and he walked away, I breathed through the hunger and began to learn the long art of small cruelties, the kind that are not cruel at all, but precise, like taking a single card from a house of cards until the top collapses and everyone else is left to wonder why. That night, as I sat with my coffee and a newspaper I scarcely read, I carved the first real plan into the margin of a page. It was not pretty. It was not dramatic. It was a calendar of small truths, a chain that, if ironed into place, would make him look into an empty mirror and see the man he truly was. The ledger had begun to balance. And balance, I had decided, can feel a lot like justice. The subway scars had faded to pale lines, but the memory beneath them stayed alive like static in the bones. I woke early now, before sunrise, when the city was half asleep and honest. That quiet hour became my ally. I brewed coffee strong enough to taste like penance, opened my old notebook, and began cataloging Jonathan Collins. It started as observation, simple, innocent. A man writes down when another man leaves the house, what car he drives, who he meets for lunch. But over time, observation turns into architecture. I mapped Jonathan's life like an engineer studying a collapsing bridge. Every inconsistency became a loose nail. He'd built his world on appearances, expensive watches, charity dinners, polite words spoken like currency. I would dismantle him with the only thing he never respected, truth. He was a financial consultant, or so he said. I discovered, through a former colleague of mine named Harold, that Jonathan's consulting was a polite umbrella over a series of risky shell investments. Harold remembered him from a corporate seminar 5 years back, the kind of event where egos drink cocktails until integrity leaves the room. Collins, Harold said over the phone, his voice crackling. That boy's got hands too clean for the dirt he steps in. I didn't need to understand every number. I only needed to know the rhythm of deceit, and I knew that music well. You can't live 70 years without learning how people hide rot beneath perfume. So I traced his boasts backward, the trips to Miami for clients, the sudden new car, the charity donations that coincided suspiciously with business scandals in the local news. My daughter, Lily, visited often, trying to bridge the growing distance between her husband and me. Dad, can't we just move on? She asked one Sunday as she placed flowers on my table. I smiled, because bitterness shouted but patience whispered. Moving on, I said softly, isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. She frowned, unsure whether I was forgiving or warning. Maybe both. By then I had begun my quiet audit, not of his finances, but of his soul. I observed how Jonathan treated waiters, how his voice hardened when someone disagreed, how he laughed too loud when boasting and too quickly when accused. These were not random habits. They were tells. The same kind gamblers make when they're bluffing. My plan was simple. Collect small truths, each one sharp as glass. Let him cut himself reaching for control. One evening, while attending a family dinner at their townhouse, a modern glass cage filled with laughter that sounded rehearsed, I noticed something peculiar. A folder on his desk, labeled Ridgeway Holdings, lay slightly ajar. I wasn't snooping. I was waiting for my coat, and curiosity sometimes wears the same face as patience. Inside the folder were invoices, 3 of them, signed by someone named J. Moore, a name I'd later learned didn't exist beyond Jonathan's handwriting. He had been paying himself through a fictitious subcontractor. That night, back home, I copied the signature onto a separate page. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the thrill of precision. Revenge is never wild. It is the science of restraint. Days passed, then weeks. I made no sudden moves. I smiled at Jonathan when he made his cheap jokes. I brought wine to dinners I detested. I even complimented the tie he wore to church. All the while, I fed small crumbs of truth to people who mattered in his world. A quiet whisper to a mutual friend about accounting confusion. A casual remark to Lily's friend who worked at a law firm about paperwork inconsistencies. Not accusations, just seeds. The kind that bloom in gossip before they bloom in ruin. Jonathan noticed eventually. He began locking his study more carefully. He changed passwords twice in a week. Paranoia is an excellent perfume. It lingers. I watched the first lines of fear etch into his confident posture. He still smiled, but his laughter came late to jokes. When people mentioned work, his eyes flickered sideways as though someone might be watching. The beauty of a quiet audit is that it doesn't shout. It hums beneath the noise, steady and invisible. I wanted him to feel the weight of unseen judgment, not from police, not from creditors, but from his own reflection. When guilt begins whispering in a man's ear, you don't need to raise your voice. Lily grew uneasy. He's been distracted, she said one morning. Jumpy. Everyone gets jumpy when they think someone's watching. I replied, staring at my untouched coffee. She gave me a puzzled look, then laughed awkwardly. You sound like you were watching him. I met her gaze and smiled faintly. I'm watching over you, Lily. There's a difference. The day after that, Jonathan confronted me, the first open clash since the subway. He came to my porch, fists in pockets, smile too wide. You've been telling people lies, old man, he said. I leaned against the railing, the sunlight soft on my scar. If they're lies, I told him, why do they sound so familiar to you? His face twisted just slightly. That half second when a man's mask cracks before he remembers he's wearing one. Then he laughed and walked away, but I saw his shoulders tighten, his stride shorten. The performance was slipping. That night, I made an entry in my notebook. He is starting to feel the air change. Good. I didn't celebrate. I didn't drink. I only sat by the window, listening to the city hum, and realized something unsettling. Revenge didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ash, but ash that still glowed with purpose. The quiet audit wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about truth reclaiming its place in the room. The subway tracks had once been his stage. Now, every dinner table, every phone call, every silence between his words, that was mine. And in those silences, I could already hear the creak of the house he built on borrowed virtue beginning to fold. There's a moment in every long game when the line between truth and revenge blurs. For me, it came one gray afternoon in November when the rain looked tired of falling. I was visiting my daughter's house under the pretense of delivering a photo album. In truth, I wanted to confirm a suspicion that had been needling me for weeks. Jonathan's study always smelled of leather and expensive failure. He liked things that made him appear important: mahogany desk, brass lamp, a framed certificate with his name embossed in gold. Beneath all that polish was a locked drawer that whispered louder than any of his speeches. I waited until he left for his meeting. He always called them that, never specifying what kind. My daughter was upstairs with the kids. The moment the door closed, I moved quickly, quietly, like muscle memory from a younger life. I found the spare key inside an old cigar box labeled Ridgeway, the same name I'd seen weeks ago. The drawer opened with a sigh. Inside were folders, envelopes, and one small safe. The papers at the top looked routine: statements, receipts, letters. Then my eyes caught something that made the air thicken: a document titled Wedding Expense Allocation. My daughter's name was on it. Mine too. And beneath, a signature that looked very much like mine, except it wasn't. Jonathan had forged my approval to withdraw $30,000 from the trust I'd created for Lily years ago, money meant for her security if anything ever happened to me. He'd rerouted it into one of his fake companies, masking it as wedding-related transactions. I traced the ink with a trembling finger. The signature was almost perfect, except for one detail: my middle initial was missing. He'd been clever, but not careful. My heart didn't pound, it slowed. It's strange how quiet true anger is. There's no shouting inside your skull, just clarity. I closed the folder, replaced it exactly as I found it, and left the room without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table under the low hum of the refrigerator and stared at my hands. They looked old, but steady. I wrote a single sentence in my notebook. He stole from my daughter. This is the line. For days, I pretended everything was normal. Thanksgiving approached, and the family buzzed with plans. I let Jonathan carve the turkey. I laughed at his toasts. I watched him kiss my daughter's hand and whisper words that made her smile. Every gesture felt like theater, and I was the only one who had read the script. Then came the storm inside me. The question that every man must face when wronged. How far is too far? I could go to the police, but Jonathan would twist it into confusion. He had friends in the right places. He'd cry misunderstanding, paint me as senile. No, public justice was his terrain. I needed something slower, more precise. So I began building a trap made entirely of truth. I contacted Harold again, the old colleague. He introduced me to a retired accountant named Valerie, a woman who had spent 30 years dissecting fraudulent ledgers. I told her I needed advice for a family matter. She didn't ask questions. Some people recognize pain without needing details. She agreed to quietly look over copies of certain documents I found in an old file. Within a week, she confirmed it. The funds were laundered through multiple dummy accounts, each circling back to one registered under Jonathan's name. Ironically, the account bore my daughter's birthday, subtle cruelty disguised as sentimentality. I didn't react. I just folded the papers and stored them inside an envelope marked insurance. Revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was administration. The next Sunday, Jonathan invited the whole family to dinner. To celebrate the new deal, he said. Deals, for men like him, were oxygen. He needed the illusion of success to breathe. Midway through dinner, he leaned across the table and asked, Merrick, how's the pension treating you? I smiled. Still feeding me better than your conscience feeds you. The table laughed. They thought it was humor. But Jonathan's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second. He felt the undertone, the warning. Later, while the others cleared the table, he cornered me near the hallway. You think you're clever, old man? He hissed. You're playing a game you can't win. I looked him dead in the eye. The thing about games, Jonathan, is that only fools think they're playing. He left, face tight, jaw twitching. He didn't know that, in the days to come, the walls would start closing in. The accountant I'd met, Valerie, had already forwarded a copy of her findings to a regulatory investigator she trusted. The man didn't know my name, but he knew Jonathan's company. From there, all it would take was time. Revenge, I realized, isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's a clock, and the sound of it ticking drives your enemy mad long before the hour strikes. The first sign that the clock was working came 2 weeks later. Jonathan stopped boasting. His phone calls grew shorter, his nights longer. Lily mentioned how distracted he'd become. He's been sleeping in his office lately, she said, worry in her tone. He says it's stress. Maybe he's starting to understand what stress really means, I replied softly. One evening, he called me, his voice raw. You think you're untouchable? You think people don't talk? I don't need them to, I said. I let truth do the talking. Then I hung up. That night, I stood by the window, rain streaking the glass, and whispered to the city below. He pushed me onto the tracks. But I learned to live there. And now, I'll watch him learn what it feels like when the ground moves beneath his feet. I closed the notebook and wrote 2 words at the bottom of the page. No return. You can tell when a man's life starts to tilt. The first sign isn't the shouting or the broken glass. It's the silence that follows his laughter. Jonathan Collins had stopped laughing. I noticed it at Lily's birthday dinner. The room was warm. Candles flickered against the polished cutlery, but he kept glancing at his phone every few minutes. His smile came late. His words stumbled in rehearsed cheer. It was the look of a man rehearsing normalcy and failing. He didn't know that every step he took was already being watched, though not by police or reporters. The real watchers were the small people he'd underestimated for years, the assistant he'd mocked, the neighbor he'd ignored, the former colleague who remembered every unpaid favor. I simply gave them a nudge, a reminder of what they already knew. The walls around him were made of paper. I'd only shown people where the matches were. It began with a quiet phone call from Harold. Your friend's name has been popping up in questions about fraudulent filings, he said. Apparently, someone's been digging through Ridgway's accounts. Someone? I asked. Harold chuckled. Anonymous tipster. Probably a client. He'll never know who. I thanked him and hung up. Then I poured myself a small glass of scotch, not to celebrate, but to remember restraint. Too much satisfaction spoils precision. The next week, Jonathan's company faced an internal review, a phrase that sounds harmless until you realize it means wolves circling. He told Lily it was routine procedure, but I saw the way his hands twitched as he buttoned his cuffs. A man's body often confesses what his mouth won't. That Sunday, he came to see me. No invitation, no pretext. He stood on my porch in the rain, suit soaked, eyes restless. "Did you start this?" he asked quietly. No arrogance now, just exhaustion. "I started nothing," I replied. "I simply stopped pretending." He stared at me for a long time, jaw moving like a man chewing on regret. Then he said, "You're going to destroy your daughter's life." I met his gaze and whispered, "No, Jonathan. You already did that the day you stole from her." He left without another word. I watched his car disappear into the fog. There was no joy in it, only the steady rhythm of inevitability. The following days were a symphony of unraveling. The company suspended him pending investigation. His closest associate, a man named Dunbar, publicly distanced himself. Then came the whispers that Jonathan had falsified expense reports, manipulated investors, and forged signatures. I didn't need to fan the flames. The truth burns fine on its own. Lily called me in tears. "Dad, something's wrong with John. He's been different. He barely sleeps. He snaps at everyone." I forced my voice to sound tired but calm. "Maybe the world is asking him to account for himself." "Account for what?" she demanded. "For being the kind of man who mistakes silence for forgiveness," I said softly, then changed the subject before she could answer. The hardest part of revenge isn't planning it. It's surviving the sight of someone you once loved destroying themselves. I hadn't realized how much that would hurt. Watching my daughter crumble between loyalty and disbelief was punishment enough. But I reminded myself, the web had to tighten completely before truth could hold. So I took another step. I called Valerie, the retired accountant. I asked if she still had copies of her reports. "Of course," she said. "But are you sure you want this to go public? It'll ruin him." "It's not about ruin," I answered. "It's about record keeping." Within a week, an article appeared online, small publication, local business section. Alleged irregularities in Ridgeway Holdings. No names yet, but insiders knew. Jonathan's phone started buzzing endlessly. The firm's board members called emergency meetings. Neighbors whispered, and I watered my garden. That's the strange mercy of age. You learn to let the world panic while you sip your tea. A few nights later, around midnight, I heard a car pull into my driveway. The headlights cut through my curtains. I went to the door and found Jonathan standing there again, drenched and desperate. His tie was missing, his eyes hollow. "You think this makes you righteous?" he barked. "You're ruining my family." "I'm reminding you it was mine first," I said. He took a step closer. "You have no idea what you've started. You think you can control this?" "I don't need control," I said quietly. "I just need truth to breathe." For a moment, I thought he might hit me. His hand twitched, then dropped. Something in him broke that night. He turned and walked away without another word. After he left, I sat in the dark and wrote a note in my book. He's beginning to fear shadows he can't name. Good. Let him learn the shape of conscience. Over the next few weeks, his decline became public. His name vanished from the firm's website. Rumors of bankruptcy swirled. The house, that pristine palace of pride, went up for sale. Lily tried to hold the family together, but there are some storms you can't outrun when they start inside your own home. Through it all, I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I merely watched the threads I'd set in motion tighten around him until even his breath sounded like apology. One evening, as winter crept in, I stood at the same subway platform where he'd once pushed me. The tracks hummed below, indifferent as ever. I dropped a single coin into the darkness and whispered, "Balance restored." But as I turned to leave, a thought chilled me. I hadn't finished. The web might have closed around him, but my daughter was still trapped inside it. And if I wanted true peace, I'd have to free her without letting her see the blood on my hands. That would be the hardest act of all. Some wars are won without witnesses. Others demand an audience. I didn't plan for mine, but fate is fond of irony. The first Real crack appeared on a Thursday morning in December. I was reading the paper, not the one that mattered, just the public one. Jonathan's name appeared in a column buried between advertisements. Local consultant under review for financial misconduct. No photo, no accusations yet, just a whisper printed in ink. But whispers have a way of echoing in marble hallways. By noon, the whisper had reached his office. By evening, it was dinner conversation across half the neighborhood. I didn't need to lift a finger. My patience had grown its own wings. But the story didn't stop there. Someone, maybe Harold, maybe Valerie, leaked the report itself. Anonymous. Detailed. It included transaction codes, forged authorizations, and a faint digital trail leading straight back to Jonathan Collins. Even the missing middle initial on my signature was mentioned. The newspaper called it a pattern of deliberate deception. That night, the phone rang 6 times before I answered. Lily's voice was shaking. "Dad, you've seen it, haven't you?" "I have." "It's not true, is it? Please tell me this isn't what it looks like." I could hear the storm behind her words, love fighting logic. "It's exactly what it looks like, sweetheart," I said quietly. "Only worse." Silence. Then a single sob, the kind that sounds like a heart cracking down the middle. "He said you're trying to ruin him. He's doing a fine job of that himself." I hated the conversation. Not because I doubted my course, but because I was finally paying for it in tears I hadn't intended to collect. Jonathan, meanwhile, was unraveling in public. His company released a statement, suspending him indefinitely pending investigation. The news spread fast. By the weekend, neighbors avoided eye contact. Friends stopped calling. He had always lived on borrowed respect, and now the lender wanted repayment. I watched from a distance. I didn't celebrate. I simply noted it down in my book. First blow landed. Collateral damage, my daughter's faith. Days passed. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Valerie again. "He's trying to move money offshore," she said. "He's desperate." "Let him try," I answered. Desperation writes its own confession. And indeed, it did. In a flurry of panic, Jonathan made a mistake. One transaction too many, one lie too obvious. The investigator connected the dots. A formal case was opened. The words fraud and embezzlement began appearing beside his name. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. I remember standing by my window that night, snow falling in soft flurries, the city below blurred in white. My reflection stared back, an old man, lines carved deep, eyes colder than he remembered. I whispered, "This isn't revenge anymore. It's accounting." But the hardest part was still ahead. A week later, Lily came to see me. She didn't knock. She never did. Her face was pale, eyes swollen. She carried a box, Jonathan's personal things. "They fired him," she said softly. "He's broken, Dad. He's sleeping on the couch. Reporters call every day." I said nothing. "You wanted this, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I wanted truth," I said. "Nothing more." "But the truth destroyed everything," she cried. "No, Lily," I replied, voice calm but sharp as winter air. "The lie did that. The truth just showed us the wreckage." She didn't answer. She left the box on my table and walked out into the snow. I didn't follow. Some distances have to exist for healing to begin. That night, I opened the box. Inside were fragments of Jonathan's pride, a broken watch, old receipts, a silver pen engraved JC. I turned the pen in my hands, remembering the sound of the train, the echo of betrayal, the taste of dust on my tongue. I wondered if forgiveness was possible in the ruins of a man's downfall. Then I saw it, a folded envelope at the bottom of the box, addressed to Lily. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a note written in Jonathan's hurried scrawl. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. He hates me because I survived pushing him. But he doesn't know." I pulled him up. "He fell? Yes, but I reached out. He didn't see. I saved him, and now he's killing me slowly for something I didn't finish." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. My mind did. Could it be true? Had I been too blind, too proud, to notice a hand that might have tried, too late, to help me? No. I remembered the eyes. Cold. Certain. A man who believed he could decide who lived and who didn't. Yet doubt had crept in, unwelcome but persistent. It's easy to hate a monster. Harder when the monster might once have hesitated. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Then I whispered into the dark. "If you tried to save me, Jonathan, you still failed, because you never learned what living truly means." The first blow had landed. His life was in pieces. But for the first time since that subway platform, I realized something chilling. Revenge doesn't end when the enemy falls. It ends when you stop listening for the sound of their breath. And I wasn't sure I'd stopped yet. The truth, once unleashed, never returns quietly. Jonathan had fallen from grace. But desperate men don't die cleanly. They claw on their way down. It began with whispers about me. At first, small things. Neighbors asking odd questions. Former colleagues receiving strange emails signed with my name. Then, one morning, I found a letter from a law firm in my mailbox, a defamation notice. Jonathan was accusing me of slander, libel, and malicious interference. The irony almost made me laugh. He'd built his life on deceit, and now he wanted justice as if it were a service he could purchase. But I didn't laugh, because behind the absurdity was calculation. He was striking back. The news outlets that had once printed his downfall now received anonymous tips that I had falsified evidence, manipulated sources, even bribed investigators. None of it was true, of course. But lies have a way of dressing like truth when told by a man who knows the system. My phone rang off the hook for 2 days. Valerie called, worried. They're saying you fabricated the documents. Merrick, are you safe? I've survived worse, I said. A train once tried to make me part of the tracks. Still, I felt it, that old tremor of fear. Not for myself, but for Lily. She'd been quiet since the scandal broke. Now, suddenly, she called. Dad, did you? The question hit harder than any fall ever could. Did I what? I asked. Did you forge those reports? He says you framed him. Her voice cracked, carrying the sound of every betrayal that word could hold. Lily, I said slowly, truth doesn't need frames. It stands even when no one believes it. But she didn't answer. Only silence. The kind that builds walls thicker than concrete. Jonathan had found my weak spot, not my pride, but my family. He began showing up in public again, speaking to journalists, painting himself as the tragic victim of an old man's obsession. He's bitter, he told one interviewer. He's lonely and angry that life moved on without him. I watched it all play out on the evening news, his false humility so polished it almost gleamed. But even as he lied, I saw the edges of him trembling. His hands twitched. His eyes darted between cameras. Guilt is hard to hide when the lights burn this bright. Still, his plan worked, for a time. People started avoiding me. Friends from church crossed the street. A reporter knocked on my door, asking if I had any regrets about orchestrating such a personal vendetta. I closed the door without a word. That night, I sat at my desk and looked at my reflection in the black window. You wanted a reckoning, I whispered. Now you're living in it. For the first time, I doubted myself. Was this justice or obsession? Had the line vanished completely? But then I thought of Lily's trust fund, the forged signature, the months of gaslighting, and I remembered the cold hum of the subway. The question faded. I decided that if he wanted a public game, I'd give him one. At the next community fundraiser, one Jonathan had organized long before his scandal, I arrived uninvited. The hall was filled with the same smiling faces that once praised him. He was there, of course, trying to reclaim dignity with forced laughter. When he saw me, the color drained from his face. Merrick, he said tightly, forcing a smile. Didn't expect to see you here. I was invited, I lied. Apparently, the guest list forgives faster than I do. People turned their heads, quiet curiosity spreading like wildfire. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. You're a brave man, Jonathan. To talk about charity when your hands are still dirty. His composure cracked. You think you can humiliate me again? He hissed. I don't have to, I said. You do it beautifully all by yourself. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. The cameras flashed, too fast for him to realize what he'd done. Security pulled him away, guests murmured, and for a moment, the hall was electric with scandal. That single outburst was enough. The next morning, photos of him manhandling an elderly man appeared online. Headlines followed. Disgraced consultant loses control at charity event. His sponsors dropped him. His reputation, already shattered, turned to dust. But I didn't feel triumph. Only emptiness. Because when I returned home that night, Lily was waiting on my porch, tears streaking her face. Why, Dad, she whispered. Why keep pushing? He's already broken. Because he pushed first, I said quietly. That was years ago, she cried. You're both drowning now, and I don't know who to reach for. She walked away before I could answer. The porch light flickered as her car disappeared into the fog. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold air press against my lungs. The next morning, I opened my notebook and wrote a new line beneath all the rest. Retribution received, but peace still absent. Jonathan had tried to ruin me, and in trying, he'd only buried himself deeper. Yet somehow, I wasn't free. Revenge had become a room with no doors. Later that week, I saw him again. Alone, outside a convenience store, unshaven and wearing the same coat for days. He looked up as I passed, eyes hollow, voice low. "Are you happy now, old man?" I stopped, looked at him, and said the truth that hurt us both. No, not even close. He turned away, shoulders hunched, and I realized the war had ended, not with victory, but with exhaustion. There were no winners here, only survivors. As I walked home through the falling snow, I thought of Lily, of forgiveness, of how revenge, once started, doesn't stop until it consumes the hands that built it. That night, I closed the notebook for the first time in months. Not because the story was over, but because I needed silence to remember what it felt like to simply breathe without planning the next move. Outside, the wind whispered against the glass. It sounded almost like mercy. For weeks, silence ruled my house. No phone calls, no visitors, not even Lily. Only the clock ticked, steady and judgmental, as if measuring the cost of every choice I'd made. I told myself it was over. Jonathan was finished, jobless, disgraced, half a ghost. But revenge has an aftertaste that lingers. It doesn't fade when the enemy falls. It stays until you realize you've built a cage and locked yourself inside. I started walking more, trying to remember what peace looked like. Some mornings, I went to the park, fed pigeons, nodded at strangers who didn't know my story. Yet even there, in the hum of normal life, the world whispered his name. Jonathan Collins. Fraud. Scandal. Failure. And somewhere behind every headline was me. The old man who'd survived the subway and learned how to twist truth into justice. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single page, typed. "He's losing everything. His health. His mind. He can't sleep. If you have any humanity left, stop. A friend." No signature. Just that. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe Valerie. Maybe Harold. Maybe someone from his family. But the words lodged in my chest like gravel. For the first time in months, I hesitated before opening my notebook. That night, I couldn't shake the image. Jonathan alone in some half-empty apartment, lights off, eyes bloodshot from insomnia, waiting for a knock that would never come. I didn't pity him, not exactly. But I began to understand the strange arithmetic of revenge. Every loss you give returns in a different form. So I did something reckless. I decided to offer him a mercy. I called Lily. She didn't pick up. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. Finally, I left a message. Tell him I want to talk. No lawyers. No lies. Just talk. A week passed before I got an answer. It came through Lily, reluctantly. He said he'll meet you. Tomorrow. Noon. The old cafe near the station. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same station where our story began. When I walked in, the place smelled of burnt coffee and rain. Jonathan sat by the window, thinner now, hair unkempt, face pale. He looked less like a villain and more like a man who'd seen too much of himself. He didn't rise when I approached, just stared. "So," he said, voice rasping, "you win." "I didn't come to win," I said. "I came to end it." He laughed, bitter, hollow. "You ended me months ago. I didn't do anything you didn't start." He leaned forward, eyes trembling. "I did reach for you that day. On the tracks. You didn't see." The words hit like a blow I hadn't braced for. I studied his face, searching for a lie, but saw only exhaustion. Maybe it was true. Maybe he had reached out. Too late, too small, but reached nonetheless. "I saved you," he said, voice cracking. "And you've been killing me for it ever since." "No," I said quietly. "You saved your conscience, not me." He slumped back, whispering something I barely heard. Same thing. For a long time, we sat in silence. The rain tapped the windows, and the city moved on outside. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. But as I turned, he said, "You got what you wanted. Now what?" I didn't have an answer. That night, I wrote only one line in my notebook: mercy given, consequences unknown. In the days that followed, something strange happened. The story faded. The press found new scandals. People stopped pointing. I even began receiving quiet nods from those who'd once avoided me. The kind of respect that doesn't come with applause, only acknowledgement. But peace remained slippery, because mercy, once given, demands consistency. I heard through Harold that Jonathan was seeking therapy. Trying to rebuild, he said. No job yet, but he's still standing. Part of me wanted that. Another part didn't trust it. You can't spend a lifetime fighting someone without them becoming part of you. I had spent so long defining myself against him that the idea of his absence felt like losing a mirror. Still, I tried to move forward. I started volunteering at a community shelter, fixing broken heaters, helping kids with school forms. One of them, a shy boy named Micah, asked once, "Mister, why do your hands shake when you write?" "Because they remember," I said. "Remember what? That sometimes winning isn't worth what it costs." It was the closest I'd come to confession. Then, one evening, Lily came by. No warning, no call, just the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. She stepped out, wrapped in her old coat, eyes softer than they'd been in months. "He's trying, Dad," she said. "He got a part-time job. He doesn't drink anymore." I nodded. "Good. He asked me to thank you," she continued. "Said you gave him a chance he didn't deserve." I looked away. "Tell him not to waste it." She smiled faintly. "You're still angry." "I'm still human," I said. When she left, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't destroyed my soul. It had refined it, burned away everything superficial until all that was left was raw, inconvenient truth. Jonathan's downfall had shown me who I was, who I refused to be, and what forgiveness actually costs. It isn't peace. It's endurance. That night, as I turned off the lights, I whispered a small prayer. Not for him, not even for me, but for the space between us. That fragile line where hatred had ended and something quieter had begun. The next morning, I didn't open my notebook. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, I had nothing left to record. But the story wasn't over yet. Because mercy may heal, but it also reveals. And what it was about to reveal would test whether I'd truly learned anything at all. Peace, I learned, doesn't come as a gift. It comes as a burden you learn to carry quietly. Weeks passed after my meeting with Jonathan. The world moved on, scandals faded, names were replaced in headlines, and people found new tragedies to gossip about. But beneath that public silence, life rearranged itself in ways neither of us expected. Jonathan had vanished from most circles. I heard, through Lily, that he'd found work repairing electronics in a small shop downtown. He no longer wore suits. He walked to work every day, rain or shine, head down, hands deep in his coat pockets. She said he barely spoke, that he'd stopped defending himself, stopped explaining, just accepted. For a time, I thought that was enough punishment, until I learned what real fallout meant. One afternoon, Harold stopped by my porch. He didn't smile. "You heard what happened?" "No," I said slowly. He sighed. "The investigation turned up more than anyone expected. Turns out, Jonathan wasn't the only one moving money. His partners are being charged. But here's the thing. He's the one taking all the blame. Everyone else walked away clean." I felt the words settle heavy in my chest. "He's the scapegoat," I murmured. Harold nodded. "He's going to trial next month. Might serve time." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the porch, cold and steady. When Harold left, I sat there until dark, trying to understand why my heart felt heavier than it had the day I fell onto those tracks. I had wanted justice, not destruction. But revenge doesn't take requests. It eats everything it touches. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Lily's voice in my head. "He's trying, Dad. He doesn't drink anymore." And now, she would have to watch him stand before a judge, stripped of even the illusion of redemption. The next morning, I drove to the city courthouse. I told myself I was there to watch, to witness the final act of a story I'd started. But when I saw him through the glass doors, thinner, older, wearing the same coat I'd seen him in at the cafe, I realized I wasn't there for closure. I was there for guilt. He looked up as they led him inside. Our eyes met across the corridor. No hatred, no fire, just a kind of tired acknowledgement. Two men who had shared a battlefield and lost the same war. The hearing was short, routine. Technical words filled the air: embezzlement, fraud, mitigating factors. He didn't argue, didn't even defend himself, just nodded when the judge asked if he understood the charges. When the gavel struck, the sound was final, not just for him, but for me. I left before the sentencing ended. I didn't need to hear the number. Whatever it was, it wouldn't bring peace back into our house. Driving home, I stopped at the old subway station. I hadn't been there since that night. The platform looked smaller now, less terrifying. I stood at the edge, staring into the dark tunnel. Somewhere in that blackness was the ghost of who I'd been, the man who fell, and the man who decided to rise differently. I whispered into the hum of the rails, "It's over." But the silence that answered didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like judgment. That evening, Lily came by again. Her eyes were red, but her voice steady. "He's going away for 2 years," she said quietly. "He told me not to visit." "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "Are you?" "Yes, but I don't regret surviving." She nodded slowly. "He asked me to give you this." She handed me a folded sheet of paper. Inside, a single line written in his uneven handwriting. "Tell him I understand now. Some debts can't be paid in money." I read it twice. My throat tightened. I folded the note and placed it in my jacket pocket without a word. After she left, I sat alone for a long time, thinking about mercy, consequence, and the strange balance life keeps even when we try to tip the scale. I had destroyed a man's world, but in doing so, I'd rebuilt my own, not in glory, but in quiet accountability. I started writing again. Not the lists, not the plans, but a letter. To Lily. "My daughter, if you ever read this, know that I did not fight him out of hatred. I fought him because I wanted you to see what truth costs, and why it's worth paying for. I was pushed onto those tracks, but what nearly killed me wasn't the fall. It was believing that silence was safer than justice. If my war took too much from you, I am sorry. If it gave you courage, I am grateful. Dad." I sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my notebook, the same one filled with every thought I'd written since that day. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in darkness, listening to the wind. Outside, winter pressed against the glass. Somewhere downtown, a man I once hated was sitting behind bars, maybe reading, maybe thinking, maybe finally at peace. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. Because revenge had ended. What remained was consequence. And consequence, though cruel, was honest. Time slows down in the last stretch of winter. The air grows still, the days shorter, and even guilt seems to move with frostbitten patience. Jonathan had been gone for 6 months when I received the call. A prison chaplain, polite, calm, practiced in bad news. "Mr. Hawk, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Collins. He's requested to see you." For a while, I said nothing. The past 6 months had been a slow unspooling of tension, my daughter and I speaking again, cautiously, rebuilding a fragile bridge. The house no longer echoed with anger. But beneath every quiet meal, every forced smile, there lingered a ghost. His ghost. "I'll come," I finally said. The prison sat on the outskirts of town, a block of gray walls and weary souls. The kind of place where time didn't move forward, it just looped endlessly. The guard led me down a narrow corridor, doors clanging behind us like punctuation marks in a story that refused to end. Jonathan sat at a metal table. He looked smaller, thinner, yes, but more than that, reduced. His hair had gone fully gray, his eyes dull, but no longer bitter. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. Not the smirk I remembered, but something human. "Merrick," he said softly, voice cracking. "You came." I wasn't sure I should. Neither was I. We sat in silence for a while. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed. Life continued, indifferent. "I've had time to think," he said finally. "More than enough." I imagined so. He looked up at me, eyes trembling. "I used to hate you. Thought you destroyed me out of spite. But then I realized you just finished what I started." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "That day at the station," he whispered, "I didn't mean to kill you. But I didn't mean to scare you. I wanted to see you fall, to feel small. Because you made me feel that way every time you looked at me like I wasn't good enough for her." I stared at him, not in shock, but in recognition. There it was, the truth beneath all the lies. Pride, insecurity, the oldest poison of all. "I reached out," he continued. "But maybe I didn't reach far enough." He paused, coughed softly, then added, "You won, Merrick. You got your justice. But tell me something, did it fix anything?" I wanted to lie. To say yes. To say I slept better now, that my daughter was safe, that the world had been set right. But the truth weighed heavier than pride. No, I said. It didn't fix anything. It just stopped the bleeding. He nodded slowly, as if that answer was enough. Then he slid an envelope across the table. It's for Lily. Not from me. From what's left of the man she married. I can't ask her to forgive me, but maybe she can remember that once I loved her honestly. I didn't open it. I just tucked it inside my coat. Before I left, he said something that has followed me ever since. You know, Merrick, revenge isn't the opposite of forgiveness. It's just its shadow. You can't have one without the other standing somewhere close. I walked out without replying. Because what could I say? He was right. Outside, the cold wind hit my face like absolution. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that means spring is coming but not yet ready to show itself. I drove home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other clutching the letter like a fragile confession. Lily was waiting when I arrived. She looked older, tired in ways grief often makes you. How was he, she asked. Different, I said. Smaller, but maybe more real. She nodded. Did he say anything? I handed her the envelope. She hesitated before opening it, then read quietly. I didn't ask what it said. When she finished, tears rolled down her cheeks, not the tears of loss, but of release. Thank you for going, she whispered. I owed it to both of us, I said. Later that night, I sat by the window, the letter still on the table between us. The world outside was silent except for the wind whispering through bare branches. I opened my notebook, the one filled with months of pain and plans, and wrote the final entry. Justice done. Debt paid. The past cannot be repaired, but it can be understood. Forgiveness is not surrender. It's the quiet act of letting the ghost stay buried. Then, for the first time since all of it began, I tore the pages out, one by one, feeding them into the fireplace. The flames caught slow at first, then roared, swallowing every word I'd written about vengeance and survival. As the paper curled into ash, I whispered, "Goodbye, Jonathan." When the fire died down, only one page remained, blank, empty, waiting. I left it that way, because every story needs silence at the end. A moment where the echoes stop, and what's left isn't pain or triumph, just life. And in that stillness, I finally heard what I'd been chasing all along. Not revenge, not forgiveness, just peace. Spring arrived late that year, cautious, hesitant, like the world itself had learned to move slower after too much breaking. The snow melted in uneven patches. The trees outside my house stretched their arms towards sunlight they no longer trusted. And inside, I found myself doing much the same. Life didn't change all at once. It never does. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a slow, deliberate exhale. Lily started visiting more often. At first, just to drop off groceries, to check the roof, to make sure I was still eating properly. But I saw it, the unspoken need behind the errands. She wanted connection again, and I was ready, though I didn't know how to start. One evening, as we shared tea on the porch, she said, "You're quieter now." I smiled faintly. Maybe I've said everything worth saying. Do you still think about him? Every day, I admitted. But not the same way. She nodded. He writes sometimes. From prison. Short letters. He says he's learning to fix radios. Helps the guards repair old ones. Good, I said softly. It suits him, learning how to make broken things speak again. We sat in silence after that. The sun dipped low, painting everything in gold. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. That night, after she left, I opened the small wooden box on my desk, the one that had once held my notebook. Inside were only two things: the note Jonathan had written her and the final blank page I'd kept from the fire. I didn't know why I'd saved it back then. Maybe because I understood, even then, that endings need room to breathe. I took out a pen and wrote 3 words across the empty paper. I forgive you. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness isn't justice, and it isn't surrender. It's something smaller, an acknowledgement that pain can't feed you forever. That sometimes the bravest thing an old man can do is let the world move on without him trying to fix it anymore. Days turned into weeks. I built a small garden behind the house. Tomatoes, basil, a few wildflowers. The soil was stubborn, but so was I. There was something comforting about coaxing life out of dirt. Each seed felt like an apology I never got to say. One morning, as I watered the plants, a boy from down the street waved at me. Micah, the same one from the shelter. Mr. Hawk, he called. They wrote about you in the paper. Said you helped expose that fraud guy a year ago. I laughed quietly. That's old news, son. Yeah, but you're kind of famous, he said, grinning. I shook my head. Fame's for people still chasing noise. I'm chasing quiet. He didn't understand, but he smiled anyway and ran off. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the old subway station one last time. Not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The same platform, the same hum of electricity, but a different man standing there now. I looked down into the tracks, feeling the vibration beneath my feet. Not fear this time, but reminder. The metal shimmered in the light like a scar that no longer hurt. A woman nearby dropped a glove, and instinctively, I bent down to pick it up. You dropped this, I said. She thanked me and smiled. Simple, human. For a second, I realized how strange it was that I could still do something kind in the same place where cruelty had once lived. That's how you know healing's real, when the place of your worst memory becomes just another part of your day. As I left the station, I passed a vendor selling coffee. The smell took me back to mornings long before the fall, before the anger, before the noise. I bought a cup, took a slow sip, and whispered to no one, "We're square now." That night, I sat by the fireplace again. No notebook, no letters, just the sound of wood crackling and the soft pulse of rain against the roof. I thought about Jonathan, maybe sitting under the same kind of light, fixing a broken radio, listening to the static that would someday become music again. I hoped he found peace in the hum. I hoped Lily found hers in the quiet. And I hoped, selfishly, that mine would last. Because in the end, revenge was never the story. Survival was. It wasn't about payback. It was about standing back up, about refusing to let one moment define the rest of a life. I finished my coffee, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't see the tracks or the train or his face. Just light. And that was enough.